So now let's dig into our fourth and final part of this employee headcount series. And this is one where I'm going to show you extracting the number of employees you have from the payroll checks themselves, from the transactions. How many people did you pay? So the first thing we're going to do after opening up our desktop is I'm going to go ahead and connect to my GP data. I've already keyed in my password and login, and I had this data source all set up, so it made it easier to get to. So what I'm going to do now is find my payroll transactions. And as I've mentioned in the first segments, or segment number 2 and 3 of this series, I prefer using views. I find them a lot easier to manage. And in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and choose the one called historical transactions because I'm really interested in just the check information themselves. I want to know who was paid and when they were paid so I can do an employee count that way. So there it is, payroll historical. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one and choose edit. And I'm going to do an import the data in. So here is Query Editor, and I am connected to this payroll historical data. Again, we're going to go through Belinda's 3 rules, and the 3 rules are you make it something that makes sense. I'm just going to put spaces in it so it's easier to read instead of being the way the view was initially. Now we have 141 columns, and as you suspect, I do not need nor do I want 141 columns. So we are going to go through and utilize step number 2 of Belinda's 3 rules, and that is remove more columns than you think you need because it's easy to add. So I'm not going to unclick 140. I'm going to come in and just unselect all of them and add what I want to see. Now I'm going to choose the audit trail code just in case I need that. I don't think I will, but it doesn't hurt to have that. I'm going to choose employee ID because that's what I'm going to be counting, and I want to choose the check number. That's going to be the unique value in every particular field. Let's grab the check amount or the transaction amount that we're paying them because we want to look at the pay codes and what department those pay codes are in. I also need to see or would like to see the check date. So I'm going to find the check date, and there's the check date. Great. The next thing that I want to find is the department that was used. And you notice I could either pull the department from the employee MasterCard. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well just go to the MasterCard, or from the department on the transaction. And that's what I want to use. The reason I want to use this is it's possible I could be split and the employee card's only going to show the default department, and I want to see which department I was actually paid in or not. That's a question that only you who wants to choose the data can answer. Just in case I want to see job title, I'm going to choose job title. And again, we could choose the job title from the transaction or the job title from the master record. Now I also want to choose the pay code. And the reason I want to choose the payroll code is because this transaction record includes more than just the pay code. So I want to be able to be very specific as to which code I'm looking at. And I also want to actually see the payroll record. And you'll see why I'm going to do that in just a moment. So I'll select the payroll record and I'll go ahead and click OK. So now I'm down to 9 columns. And as I'm looking at the columns, you can see not everything has department or job title. And that's because it's also showing deductions, benefits, and state taxes. So I'm only interested in getting pay records themselves. So I'm going to want to narrow that down. Now, as Belinda's 3 rules apply, the next thing that I want to do is set the format so that they are indeed correct. There's only 9. I'm going to select them all and unselect the check date and the amount because those two do not get formatted as text. The other get formatted as text, so rather than doing them one at a time, I'm going to do them en masse. And now I can come in and format the decimal place here and format the check date. Now, because it's SQL, it comes over as date time, but we're only interested in the date, so I'll choose date. And now I just see the date field, so that makes that a lot easier. Okay, great. Love this. Let's get rid of all of those extra pay codes now. So we're just simply going to click on the filter window here, just like we would in Excel. And if I see everything, I can unfilter here. But once again, I also might choose to go to text filters and say equal. And now I could say when it equals, and I'll choose from this drop-down list. and now I can see more, and I'm going to say pay codes, and I'll click OK. So now I'm just seeing my pay codes, and now all of these do have departments and job titles associated with them, and I could even see the pay type that's included. So now I could see how much employee was paid for each of these pay types on each of these checks. And this should give me all the information that I need. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Close and Apply. Not as much data modeling required in this particular method, and I can see all of my fields here. So the first thing I want to do is go out and grab the employee ID and drop it, and I'm going to go and take the department and drop that with it as well. So now I want to do a distinct count based on these. So if I come in now, and this is very similar to what we did with the employee card in section or part number 2 of this series. If I take the employee count and I tell it to do a distinct count, this is doing a count of everybody who's ever been paid. So on top of this, I'm going to need to enter in some kind of filter that narrows it down to the date range that I'm looking at. So what I'm going to do is take this date and drag it in. And it's like, oh, don't know what to do with it, and it's trying to even make it a hierarchy. I'm going to come in and put a filter on it, and now I've got this date filter, and I can come in and be very specific and say, I want to look at just what happened. Don't know why I'm manually typing it in, but just this particular pay period. And so now I'm focused on just that pay period. Now, again, some of the issues that we have going on here is this is just looking at the paycheck date. So if somebody worked, if I'm looking at January, if somebody worked in December and they are no longer employed in January, and they got a check in January because they worked the last week in December, they're going to show up here. If somebody worked the last week of January and their first paycheck is in February, they are not going to show up here. If somebody is inactive now, they're still going to show up here if they got a check during the course of the month. So you don't get quite as much control here, but you could still do this, and you could do it by any period you want. Let's go back to Query Editor. We could come in under the check date here. I'm going to highlight it, and I'll go to Add Column. And because this is a date, you could see the date option is lit up here. And if I click on that drop down, I could add in the year, and now I have a year column. And I'll go back to the date, and I'll choose the drop down, and I'll select month. And now I could either put in the month number or the name of the month if I want to. So I'm going to put in the month number right now. Both of these are defaulted in as numbers. I want to reformat these so that they show up as text. Great. So here are the numbers, and you should be renaming your applied steps. I'm not doing that right now in this little simple example for the sake of time. But now I have my year and my month of the paycheck. So if I come back in and apply, now I could do something a little bit different. Even here, I could come in and say, all right, here's my employee count. I'm going to change this to a matrix. And so now what I'm going to do is take my month, for example, and drag it in the column. So now I can see month 1. And if I wanted to change this to like March, let's say, so now I can see the employee count based off of the paychecks themselves for the first 3 months of the year. That's how the third visual in my original report was done. So I hope this series helped you out and got you thinking about modeling your data and what kind of questions you really need to be asking. Because when you say, I want to see the employee head count, you also need to be saying, okay, the head count at the end of the month, everybody we paid during the month, everybody we paid in the middle of the month, or everybody who was active, whether or not they were paid. So lots of questions, hopefully lots of answers. Hope this helps.